Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the lawsuit that Cobb Tuning just settled with the EPA, and I'm going to give you guys a rundown of absolutely everything you need to know. I know there are other videos and articles about this, and we are going to do a general rundown of everything you need to know, but the most interesting and important part of this video is we're going to run down what this actually means for the industry, whether or not you should be worried as a consumer, whether Cobb Tuning is going to stop, and that's all going to be coming from the opinion and the info from a product development engineer in the aftermarket automotive space, which is me. It's what I do for a living. So I can give you guys some insights about what this means industry-wide. I can give you some insights from partners that work with Cobb Tuning on a day-to-day basis, and an organization that I am kind of by third party interacting with quite often. So I can give you some insight that most others can't, but we're gonna start this video by going down completely everything you need to know. We're gonna be a little bit more explicit than some of the other videos, and then we're gonna dive into what that means for the future. So if you wanna know everything you need to know, this is the video for you. I do also apologize, guys. I did bring my notepad because we're getting very specific about some of the things around the settlement itself and what that actually says. So I brought some notes just so I can be as informative as possible for you guys. So obviously, Cobb was approached in 2022 by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who made an accusation that later went to a settlement. We're going to talk about that in a second. But essentially, the EPA, and we're going to use quotations here, the EPA basically alleged that Cobb Tuning was using defeat devices, and that was going to allow, and I'm doing this because this is their statement in the actual court proceedings, and it was in the Western Texas court, I believe, and their defeat devices allowed customers to bypass emission controls in their cars. Now that was the big initial approach to Cobb Tuning, that Cobb Tuning was creating these defeat devices that were intentionally trying to mitigate or circumnavigate emissions rules set by the EPA and state specific legislature. Now in this process, they alleged and found out during the proceedings of this court case that Cobb sold 81,000 access ports, which alone is crazy if you think about it. The numbers on that is nuts. I didn't actually know myself that there was that many, but they sold 81,000 access ports to a variety of different makes and models. It's not just for the WRXs, it's also for other manufacturers, Porsche, etc. And they also found that they sold 8,400 non-compliant exhausts. They defined non-compliant as exhausts that either had catalytic converters that were either aftermarket, specifically designed to lower the effects of OEM catalytic converters, i.e. high flow cats that weren't doing as what they were supposed to be doing, or exhausts that had fewer catalytic converters, i.e. eliminating catalytic converters. Now, during this time, obviously Cobb Tuning settled, which, I think for the entire industry was the right thing, because there's some acknowledgement that, they did probably tote the line, but everyone totes the line, because in this aftermarket industry, of course, there are some questionable gray areas. It's like if you don't buy an OEM part, can a part that fits to an OEM component on your car really be full intellectual property? Well, there's some questions there, because technically, let's say if you were to use a duckbill, it's hard to make a mating surface that mates to an OEM surface that has intellectual property. It's hard to make the case that something like that is then pursuable for new IP, because you're mating to a surface that geometrically already has intellectual property. So there's a lot of gray area around intellectual property patenting, the rules around that. So I think maintaining a response that was gray is probably a good thing, but we'll talk about my opinions on later in the video. Now, this settlement came down to probably a pretty substantial settlement, because my guess is, just based on previous action from the EPA, that the fines and the cost of breaking these rules probably became pretty substantial. And because Cobb Tuning probably doesn't have the liquidity, because obviously car parts have a high investment cost in production, they have a high production cost, and the margins aren't great. If you're just finding that out, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But the profit versus net or gross revenue in the aftermarket industry just isn't very good. So the settlement came out to $2,914,000 plus total compliance across everything Cobb does in the future in perpetuity. Now, because theoretically this is too much of a burden for Cobb Tuning to, address in 1 year, and regardless of whether that's the case or not, they were able to do this over settlements or installments. So this is going to be paid back by Cobb Tuning in 4 installments over the next 3 years. So they don't have to take this burden on in one payment, which could have done some real damage either in production for what we want out of Cobb Tuning or their ability to meet their current needs and what they're doing as a business. We've just seen companies like Recaro, declare pretty close to bankruptcy at the point that this video is coming out. I don't actually know where that lands, but we're seeing a lot of aftermarket companies tote the line of profitability and have to, with just very little issue, basically throw in the towel. So 4 installments over 3 years, and basically the overarching compliance statement from the EPA is that they can still sell and be active as a business, but have to be covered by an executive order from CARB, or CARB is the California Air Resource Board, that shows the products do not increase emissions above allowable levels. So basically now the responsibility is on Cobb Tuning itself, to make sure that they can prove that they are compliant versus being gray or blissful ignorance around what their products are actually doing. Now, we've seen Cobb already starting a green initiative when this started happening, when the EPA first started cracking down on tuners, because individual tuners were hit before Cobb Tuning themselves. And I think Cobb probably started that program to, start the production of compliant parts. So we're seeing their green and CARB compliant parts already hitting the market. A lot of what you're already buying is already part of that program. So they have been working on this obviously for years, and this court case is from 2022. It's when it was filed. So this has been an ongoing process. Now I have my phone out because I have the EPA settlement in front of me, and you guys can skip if you want to, but I'm going to read out the actual line items that Cobb has to comply with, because I think they're actually really interesting, and there's actually a lot of them. So Cobb didn't come out unscathed here. The financial statement, that stinks, right? They owe a lot of money, but what's harder is these very, very specific compliance statements, and this is what can actually be more worrying to the consumer base. For those of you that are about to hear this for the first time or have heard this in other companies, this is actually what we're going to discuss at the end of this video about how it's going to impact just the future of this aftermarket world. So let me go for them. So this is basically what the EPA is saying as rules for Cobb. This is what they basically have to do. So first, remove any delete features from its custom tuning software, and to the extent possible, force updates to end users to remove the delete features. That first one should be pretty scary, because it means that Cobb needs to, by the full extent of their power, monitored by a federal agency, force anyone that has non-compliant tuning to become compliant. This has kind of already started. It's been a mixture of the lack of support now and also some forcing some updates, but that's a really interesting statement. The next one is destroy any defeat devices remaining in its possession. The next, cease providing technical support for any defeat device products, which means they cannot support any products that are considered defeat devices. Deny all warranty claims for any defeat device products, which means all of your warranties are now null and void. Instruct authorized dealers to no longer provide technical support or honor warranty claims pertaining to any defeat device products, which now means anyone that was certified with Cobb, that works with Cobb, that interacts with Cobb, cannot warranty any of their stuff, and they can't work with it. And Cobb probably has to pull their ability to work with them if that's the case. So there's not going to be any under the table stuff here. Revise all marketing materials to strike any information relating to replacing, defeating, bypassing, or rendering inoperative any emission control. Not sell or transfer any intellectual property associated with any defeat device products. Notify authorized dealers and known customers of any defeat device products of the settlement using specified language that informs the authorized dealers and known customers that any products at issues violate the Clean Air Act. Notify Cobb Tuning's officers and employees of the Clean Air Act prohibitions using specified language which explains the Clean Air Act's defeat device prohibition. Request that Cobb Tuning employees forfeit any aftermarket defeat devices in their possession, permanently delete and uninstall and destroy any aftermarket defeat devices in their possession. Also, sorry, it's getting really, really windy. It's about to storm. Require Cobb Tuning to offer a buyback of any defeat devices possessed by Cobb Tuning employees, which Cobb Tuning must then destroy. This is also a statement of how important I think this video is, that I'm filming right before it's going to start absolutely dumping rain on me, so a storm is coming. But that also means that employees are getting buybacks, the rest of you are not. And then conduct a Clean Air Act compliance training for Cobb Tuning's officers, employees, contractors, and consultants. That means all of us, including myself, have to basically get an update from Cobb about how to use their products, the requirements of the Clean Air Act, and I guess just to say it, this is becoming a widespread problem. if you know anything about cars, a lot of the platforms that Cobb interacts with are, Cobb is like the only option for tuning. Now there are other options, but they're just not as studied. There's not as much data. The tuning is not as robust. There's not as much experience. Cobb tuning is not going away. Accessports are not going away. The rules, the rule breaking and the gray area, however, are going away. So it's going to become much more of a stringent environment. And before we get into some insight on all this, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly put up on the screen, and I'm going to put up probably 2 screenshots, which you can pause the video, a statement from the CEO of Cobb Tuning about all of this that I also think is actually really important to what we're going to talk about in the rest of the video. So I highly recommend pausing the video and reading it. I decided not to read it out to you guys just because that's a lot of just like hearing me talk. So just pause the video, take a quick read on it. It's only going to be up for like a second. So just pause it, read it, and then we'll jump into the rest. All right, so the big question, and I think the question that a lot of people are, there's a lot of like hearsay from folks that just aren't in this environment, is what's happening? How is this going to affect our cars? What does this mean for the tuning environment? What does this mean for everything? We've escaped a little bit. It started raining on me, so we're going to finish the video, the rest of the video in the car. Usually with these videos, I want to be like way more planned out, but honestly, I just wanted to get this video out as soon as possible. I waited a little bit longer than everybody else, and we're gonna get right into it. Why? So a lot of content creators have produced content kind of like weighing in, and I think that part of what they've missed with all this coming out is the fact that they are somewhat of outsiders. And I'm not saying that I don't work at Cobb, right? I don't work for the EPA, but I work in the product development side of this where, you know, when you talk about those Cobb trainings that they then have to, do, like I'm part of that world because I'm in product development in the aftermarket for these parts. So I think some of the biggest questions that people are asking themselves are things like, how is this going to affect, tuning and all of those things? So first off, it's going to become more of a strict environment. There are more rules. There's less fly by night. The days of tuning catless downpipes and stuff like that, at least on WRXs or on Subaru platforms, are just gone. Now, other platforms can run catless downpipes. Classic is like Supras, you pretty much can get away with them, and other cars you can get away with them even without a tune. You should tune it, but that kind of tuning is kind of gone. It's in the wind. And especially also making power with less engineered parts, which I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but for a long time, the parts that you put on your car, there's not a whole lot of engineering behind them. They conceptually follow engineering physics and practices, but it's not like they're going through CFD or computational fluid dynamics and, tracing and map tracing and all that stuff. It's just not happening. Now, nowadays it is, because we actually have to prove the data behind what's happening. But for a long time, it wasn't. When you got a J-pipe, it was quite literally just wider, right? It was better formed. That was it. Just more flow, right? And then you tune all these aspects around it. The part's not optimized. Now, what's happening is parts are actually being optimized to some extent. Some of these companies are putting Jesse Cats on them, which are CARB compliant and stuff like that. But the short answer is a lot of the parts, and what the downside to what all this has happened is a lot of the parts that we're going to start seeing on the market are going to get more expensive. And now this is not just inflation. This is the actual work and engineering and production behind these parts and what actually has to go through. It's a classic example of we're getting closer to the aerospace industry. Now that's an extreme where you have a lot of documentation. We're now starting to have to document a lot of what's going on with the performance side and tuning side of parts in basically every platform. Now, is this a downside? Definitely not. Things are just going to cost more money. Are things going to go away? Absolutely not. This isn't really going to affect the industry. We're still going to have just as much tuning. People are going to be making great power. We're probably going to see more cars deemed as non-road legal. That's probably going to be something that inevitably that we're kind of already seeing, but it's going to be more of the case for people that want to break those rules. I'm sure there are going to be loopholes where people can like create track cars only, which you've always been able to do, but it's still been like there's been less of like an clear defined ruling and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more clarity there and what you can and can't do. I also think that we've already seen changes from state to state where breaking those rules are much, much more punishable, let's say, and even on an individual level. Like if you get caught in certain states with certain violations to emissions, it's less of a reference check now, and it could be like points on your license, reckless driving, reckless use of it, or reckless operation of a vehicle. They're becoming more strict in how it's happening, and I know some of you guys are going to be like, that's crazy, and some of you guys are going to be like, I've been affected by that. So you should also check out the comments with what I just said. But I think what we're going to see is just a change in what it means to tune these cars. And I can tell you that a lot of the business that I've gotten into personally in the product development side is actually applying engineering to a lot of parts. And I've been doing a lot of like contract work. Obviously, you guys know I own JXR Performance. That is like pretty low effort stuff right now. Like obviously I design my parts in a very specific way. Like I've basically, this channel started as like cheap parts. So I took cheap parts and tried to make slight adjustments to them so that they lasted longer, they were better quality, material choice was better, they were made here, there was more quality control, they had certain like features, like release features and stuff like that. But as I start getting into like contracting with other organizations and doing design engineering for them and starting also producing lines on myself, like I'm working on an exhaust line and some bigger exterior parts. Some of the things that I want to do is like the classic example, obviously, like for Subarus, we talk about like there are companies that like they don't do great business, right? I mean, we can all think of places that have terrible exterior parts that come from Taiwan. Like those are things that it costs more to solve those problems. So it's the same concept, right? It's like buying a carbon fiber part, right? It just costs more. The same thing is going to happen with all of our performance parts. We're going to see some performance parts that you just can't do anymore. It's like back in the day, TGV deletes were really common on WRXs. Nowadays, no one can touch them, right? Because they can't tune around them. The big effect is that we just have less like fly-by-night stuff going on. It's much more regulated. Tuners are much, much more careful. We've seen over the last like 2 or 3 years, large tuners basically say we're not touching X, Y, and Z parts because, we've already been violated, whatever it is. And it's insane how windy it is. I'm glad I moved into the car. But I think it's just going to overall change. Is there any negative here? Absolutely not. I think the biggest consumer negative that people could see is the lack of support and warranty. Basically, if you're running stuff that was deemed part of this like non-compliance and lawsuit, you're done. There's no support. Like if something goes wrong with your tune, some tuners might help you, but some won't, right? Higher volume tuners probably won't because it's too much of a risk for them. Same goes with Cobb with part specific stuff. If you have a problem with the part itself, you won't get any support anymore. You just have to buy a new one. You have to buy a compliant one, which might also like you might have problems with the rest of the stuff that's going on in your car. I think that's the biggest like current problem with what's going on. I think there's also some questions around, is Cobb going to develop new parts, let's say, we're just saying compliant things from Cobb that are output from Cobb for older cars where they stopped necessarily supporting but still sold accessports, exhausts, things like that. So there's some questions around that. For new customers, it's really not going to change much other than it's just going to cost more money to get into this game, to tune and do all those things. If you follow this channel, obviously I'm about to tell you something that's going to ruin a lot of your, excitement. Well, it's gonna blow a lot of your minds because if you're following the channel, you guys are always like a couple months behind what's going on. But I can speak very specifically about this because this car now has some fun little things going on with it, but you guys will see those videos as they come out. And if you didn't see that first, this is a Cobb accessport. So I'm also like, I'm running Cobb products on my car as well. And yeah, so I know this video was a little bit different. I just wanted you guys to hear that from somebody that like my livelihood depends on this kind of stuff. There's not a lot of conjecture here, right? I mean, I obviously can't give you definitives because I don't work at Cobb, but you're hearing the real deal. Like what you're hearing from me is not going to be any different from what you're hearing from anyone that isn't Cobb, but everyone that works and interacts with Cobb, honestly. So I just want to give you guys the real, and I know that there's a lot of like kind of conjecture and hearsay about, how it's going to affect the industry and all those kinds of things. I'm just like, as bad as it sounds, I'm just going to blanket statement and just say it's not going to get more extreme than what I just said. Obviously, this is, and maybe this is, there's one asterisk here, is the fact that because the EPA kind of, let's say, took down or found settlement with like the biggest player in the game, it's empowering for them. And that's the one danger here. The one thing that I think that there is kind of some danger around is the fact that this is true governance now. So it could get more strict and stringent because they've started this path of governance. And I think that's the only place that gets scary is that, if we have like blanket ECU locking, which is really terrifying, right? Obviously there's a way to break that. Great example, Supra again. It's like you can get your ECU unlocked, but like that then becomes much harder for people to get into these cars and tunes. And honestly, for a lot of cars, it devalues them because, the WRX is a great example of people buy this car because it's cheap to make a lot of power. If we start having to have this gated barrier of like $2-3 grand to start doing what you could do before, it gets to be harder and harder. So I think at some point, one of the reasons I'm not like scared tomorrow that someone's going to crack down on it is the EPA has to also realize that sometimes car manufacturers will go back at them. Right? If like Subaru thinks that 40% of their consumers are going to stop buying WRXs because they can't tune them. That's enough money for Subaru to get involved. So there's a balance to all this. It's going to happen over time. For the next couple of years, I think this is the most substantive thing that's going to happen, honestly, because they're going to have to give us time to produce parts that meet all the requirements. But there is going to be this lull. We're experiencing the lull in all instances. Like if you've got a VA WRX and you've been trying to buy a Jesse downpipe, or J pipe, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because it's so hard to get your hands on one, right? And tuners will only really tune with them. So there are some real critical examples right now. But if you're also in a VB, we haven't really seen those examples yet. There's still some nuance around the parts, right? So I know this video was a lot. This was a very long video, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I will have some updates on this as new things become clear. And I'm also going to be trying to be much more transparent about things that my business specifically interacts with. I've done some really looking at it, and it looks like I can actually talk and publish this information. So as information comes to me on the production and business side of things, I think I'm going to start sharing that with you guys, because it is interesting and it is like really relevant to this. Like there are lots of smaller rules and regulations that come out fairly regularly that we have to meet, and standards that we have to meet that the consumer side are just not aware of. And I don't see any reason at this point to see why consumers aren't aware of that. But it's also like, these are classic examples, and a lot of people like on this channel call BS on things that I say, but a lot of the time, like that information is coming directly to me from like the governing body for whatever it is. So when I talk about it, it's because like I know exactly what's going on. I'm not guessing, I'm not hearing it from somebody else, I'm not reading an article. Like I'm on the other end of it, right? So, and I think that's part of the difference. And one of the reasons I wanted to make this video and also make it a scheduled video. And although it's a scheduled video, I'm making it as fast as possible. And that's why there's a storm and we're sitting in my car and it's dark. And I apologize for this isn't a perfectly planned video, but obviously this became consumer knowledge really quickly. I didn't think it was going to have so much coverage. And I realized after watching a lot of these videos, there's just a lot of people just like talking about what could happen. And I think that we pretty much know all of the outcomes here. Like there are very few short-term outcomes that could come of this that are going to be like radically like mind-changing, right? So it's pretty much, this is like an update if there are no real problems coming. But I think it's also it's important to start understanding this. And I think one of my biggest things, and this will be the last thing I say, because at this point there is some level of ramble here, and I appreciate some of you guys that like some of this information. But the last thing that I'd say is like one of the things that I'm hoping to do with this channel, and one of the things that I feel very, very confidently and I think is a very powerful statement, is that the community that buys and works in the aftermarket world are getting dumber, right? And I don't mean that people are getting dumber, but I mean that things are getting more complicated and people aren't aware of them. So they're almost, maybe dumb is not the right word, they're becoming more ignorant or negligent of knowledge in the process of what's actually happening around their cars. And there's a lot of like really strong-headed and strong-willed people out there making some real statements, and especially like big creators that are just like couldn't be further from the truth. And it's creating a level of fear and all this stuff. And I know that a lot of this channel, people consider me to be really, really negative about things. I'm usually just a realist and I'm just reporting real information. And I'm not here to like deliver clickbait or anything like that. It's just reality. And I think one of the things that I plan to do on this channel over the winter is I'm coming out with a series of just like how things work. And we're going to break parts down from like, and we're going to look at like every part, exhausts, coilovers, everything. And we're just going to break them down. Because I think that if people were more educated, they'd have different opinions on when stuff like this comes out and they're like keyboard warriors. And they realize, and I think people just don't realize that like there's a level of complexity here that just like people aren't aware of. Like the classic one is like most people don't realize that like Cobb Tuning is a massive company, right? If you just do the numbers, like if you just do the numbers, like if you were to assume Cobb sells nothing else and you just did the numbers around the average price for an access port and a exhaust from them, and you add those numbers up over not a long period of time, you'd realize that Cobb Tuning is bringing in a lot of revenue. These aren't small companies, and it's not like these are fly-by-night organizations, right? There's a lot of money in this world, and it's a big, big industry. And they're, like if you're like abreast of it and you understand what's happening, you can be much more educated in both what you do, how you interact with people, your appeared knowledge of these cars. There's just like a lot of power. And I would say to everyone that is into automotive engineering and the aftermarket or enjoys driving your car, knowledge is power, and the more you know, the more fun it actually is. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because it feels like learning, but the more you know and the more you learn, the more you can modify on your own, the more you can talk about these, the more you can go to a car meet and actually know what you're talking about and having engaging conversations and just etc. And I think that that's a developable skill. And I think that it's one of the things that I think we should put pressure on is a lot of large content creators in this world. We should put pressure on them to actually master their craft. And I think one of the downsides, and like, I wish I could do that, but I kind of just produce realism content, right? It's just like, I say it how it is, and it just means my channel stays small, right? And I think that my hope is to kind of grow in this, even if it's slowly grow and provide as much education and content as possible. But it's hard to compete with the bigger guys that are getting clickbait for saying like tuning is over, right? You'll never tune again, or Cobb tuning is going under, or whatever it is. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I won't talk about anything else in this video. I will keep you guys posted if there are any changes, but I can promise you guys, if you don't hear anything on this channel about more for this Cobb tuning stuff, there's nothing else. So if there's hearsay elsewhere, check back on this channel to see if there's any videos. If there are not, don't worry, there have been no updates, nothing else has changed. I will tell you guys the first time something changes, and that's going to be before you guys know, because I'm going to get the information from Cobb. That will be before the pundits know too, because I interact with them, so I'll get that news before you guys. So I'll let you guys know when I have news, and otherwise, enjoy modifying your cars. Still modified, nothing's going to change. Get out there, have fun with these cars, and I'll see you guys in the next video.